Okay, hi. Earlier this semester, Steve asked me to go into the Caplin and create a new set of space documents for it. We realized during the load-in of 7 guitars that the drawing we had of the space wasn't accurate, especially in the shape of the main um, playing space. And so after strike, I went in and set up a system to try to capture the space and get a accurate set of drawings. Um, And so this video is a walkthrough of my methodology and try to explain how I set up to do it and to record where I am in this process. So I began with setting out a center line in the space, and that's this line right here. I stretched a tape measure between the two seating banks, found center, and marked that. And that's what we traditionally do for a plaster line in the space. This is a center line, and this is a line that's perpendicular to the plaster line. And originally when I drew this, it was an arbitrary length. I needed it longer than it had to be. Um, but this was a reference point for me, and this was set up using one of the laser levels in the space to set up a line that was perpendicular to the plaster line in relation to the seating banks. Anytime you're taking measurements of a space, you need to have a set of reference points that you're referring back to. Um, and that allows you to be consistent in your measurements. The Caplin is difficult because as a round space, there's not a lot of points that you can really refer to definitively and know where they are. And so in this case, I decided to set up kind of points from scratch and work with. I've got a class over here in Vectorworks that's marked as reference points. And I set out and I created 12 reference points to work from in the space. And that's what these green dots are on the screen here. I've got one on center, and I've got one at the corner of each seating bank. And then I set up a grid of 9 out in the main playing space here. And these are the points that I was taking my measurements from using a process called trilateration, which is similar to triangulation, but in this case you're taking distances to a known point, drawing overlapping circles, and then seeing uh, where they cross is the point that you're measuring to. And so for instance, from here, if I was to measure where this downstage edge was, I would take a tape measure and I would measure from my known point here, out to a point in the space. Yeah. Get rid of the fill here. And I can take a second point, and I can also measure from here out into the space. And where these 2 points intersect is the location relative. You can do a third point, say from here, and measure out, and that eliminates any possible confusion. 2 circles narrows it down to 2 points where they overlap, but depending on the size of the circle, they can be close together and it's hard to determine which is which. In theory, a third measurement gives you a perfect point at which only these line up. And so this is the process I use to determine the location of these points. I began by taking measurements as to the shape of the space and tried to locate that down on the bottom floor to get that curve of the thrust space. And I was taking measurements to the handrail brackets that are in there. I wanted to be able to also draw in where the handrails were and have a record of it. So this was a way of getting the shape of the curve as well as helping me out later on down the step. And so that's the next layer of points that I'm going to turn on here. Going around the space, we can see I've got a number of points given pretty much at every handrail bracket. They seemed a pretty good spacing and was enough to start to pull in the shape of the space here. I've got another set of points I'm going to turn on that's where the stairs come into, kind of more just theater architecture. And then I took measurements as to the location of the vom. I'm going to zoom out. But we can see the front and back of the vom openings here, front and back of the vom opening as well. And so from here we start to see what the shape is like. We're trying to get a sense of the seating bank and that. Two more sets of points that were coming in. I've got the overhead catwalks. And the way I did this was I took a laser plumb bob and I set that to points on the catwalk and then marked where they were on the floor. So I was aiming for corners of bays and along edges so I could ensure that the direction it was traveling was consistent. As much as possible, I try to have more than one set of points to help compensate for any error that might have been occurring. And finally, the other set of points that I took was the main I-beam that runs just downstage of the plaster line across here, and that's these red ones. And so this starts to tell me what the shape of the space is like, and I can start to connect these dots and see. I was somewhat restricted in trying to get measurements just to the space on the ground level and sort of in the main playing space. Once we get into the seating banks, it's harder to get reference points for where that is because then we're dealing on two different planes. And so that's a project that is going to have to be continued later on if we want to try to get that. But the critical dimensions of the vom placement, the relative angle and size of that, and everything else is on here and captured. I'm going to turn these reference points off here for a moment. So from here, I can start to connect the dots and see where things are. Using those reference points and connecting the dots, we get this shape here. This includes some things that weren't accurate on the previous drawings and are now included. Marked in green here along the back edge is the ledge that's in the back of the theater space, including drawings of it at height and width, and marking for the first time is actually the location of this doorway right here. I've got the corners of the seating banks drawn in. This shape has been refined and put in. And so everything down here on the ground level is as accurate as I can be. The shape that's in the back here is approximated based off of architectural rendering, as well as in the back of the house here. Because this is up on another level, it's hard to confirm its location. But I wanted to put it in there because to give a sense of that space. And this is something that can be continued to work on, but is less critical for kind of our daily use in there. From the points that I marked down to the ground, I was able to draw in and redo the shape of the catwalk. And, we found that there was actually quite a bit of difference in the shape of this kind of central curve of the catwalk here. And again, since I didn't have access, a good way to get measurements out for this other one, this is the original drawing of the steel space up there. And so that's going to be something that has to be come back and cross-referenced later. And in section, we can see these pieces starting to come in. I'm going to turn the seating bank on here for a moment. And so here we've drawn in the seating bank. I took remeasured to make sure that it was correct in section and that the heights were correct. And I adjusted the section to actually reflect the location of where the voms are looking towards stage left here. And drew in handrails and the handrail posts. Again, this is somewhat approximated. We're accurate over here in this section, but because I only have measurements really of this vom here and this bottom step, some of the location of these stairs going up, where they are exactly in plan, especially as they come towards center, is approximated. But since the previous section drawing was not accurate at all, and had the seating bank off down here by 8 or 12 inches, I figure this is a much better step. A couple things that I've added in as well. I took a section of measurements when I was dealing with the rigging for shipwrecked. And so I've got some secondary steel, some of these smaller I-beams that are up at roof level. I took my measurements from there and placed them in. These haven't been cross-referenced to this exact center line. These were measured up in the grid. And so there's going to be a project to kind of come in and double check the location of some of these corner points and then shift this whole piece over to make sure it's exactly in line. But it's fairly close, and I wanted to go ahead and put that in. The other thing that I added onto the ground plan that wasn't indicated really before is the location of this kind of main truss that runs across the space just downstage of the plaster line. And I've got it drawn in section here and added in. This was on a previous section drawing but wasn't marked accurately. The other thing I've added in, just because it also caught us somewhat off guard in 7 Guitars, is the approximate location of that projection screen. Looking also at this in section, I've marked in where some of the overhead steel is located, so we have that also large truss that runs upstage and downstage. This is pulled off of the Texas Scenic drawing, which was I think the original drawing that for the AutoCAD version that we were using of the space. And since that was pretty inaccurate as to the shape of the ground down here, I'm taking this with a grain of salt. But I wanted to have it included in a section. And I believe the main step to confirm this is really just to double check its height, and then as possible try to mark it on the ground plan. But since it traverses over the seating banks, there's some difficulties there, although I think we can get its location where it crosses over the VOM and then build off of that. And so once Love's a Bitch is struck, I'm going to come back in and get those points. I've updated the drawing here to have the lighting positions have been readjusted as well. Circuits are drawn in, and the sort of semi-permanent pipes that lighting uses are indicated on here as well. One of the things that's important to me in this whole process is that the drawings that are used are the same between all parties. And so this is the Vectorworks file. I've done a lot of work to try to set up some layers and classes to have reference of all the things in here in a way that's easy to use, but something that can be continued to be built upon and utilized. But the important thing is that it's the same file, and so one of the next steps I'll be doing is figuring out a way to make this also then compatible with the same layer structure and class structure in AutoCAD, so that they're both set up and approachable with the same methodology. I've left on here the out-of-date items. I think it's useful to see what changes were made and to keep track of those. And so, for example, in section, the location of this I-beam has shifted over by 4 inches. Location of the catwalks are all fairly different. And then the final thing is the location of the rigging's been updated as well to mark between the what I'm calling the accurate drawings versus the older format. So that's in here in a layer marked out of date and cross-reference only, and it's on a separate design layer so that it doesn't get accidentally adjusted. But I wanted to not lose that information. I think it's important to keep track of where these things came from. To that end, I've also created a class that's marked as a changelog, and this is just a block of text detailing kind of what I've talked about in this video. But the main thing is also then to track any changes and updates that are being done so that we have a record of it. I'm hoping that this video is helpful as a reminder, and to kind of walk through what the impetus was for this drawing and what its intended use is.